Alright, welcome back. We're going to continue our discussion about the spinal cord and spinal nerves. Last video we went through the spinal cord as the gross anatomy structure. We've talked about the different parts of the spinal cord, portions where the spinal cord is going to be enlarged, as well as where it starts and ends, and how we named these spinal nerves. Today what we're going to continue talking about is going to be looking at the other tissues that are going to be present around the spinal cord, and then we'll also get into further in depth looking at that white and gray matter that makes up the cord. Alright, so this was the image we left off with last time, looking at the three meningeal layers of the spinal cord. So, now the spinal cord itself, okay, we see that inside of it is going to be those neurons, the placement of the neurons. So the meningeal layers, this is all the supportive tissue that's set up that will surround and make sure that the neurons are able to do their job. Okay, so what are the meninges, or the things that make up the meningeal layers? Okay, these are just different membranes that separate and hold together and add protection, as well as allow for nutrition to get into all the neurons. That's what we see. So protecting the spinal cord, they're going to carry blood supplies, okay, and they are continuous with the cranial meninges. We had saw in like our discussion for the brain, the central nervous system, that the central nervous system has something called cerebral spinal fluid. The meninges is the casing in which that cerebral spinal fluid, or that CSF, is going to be found contained within. The kind of inflammation or problem that can sometimes erupt with this meninges is something called meningitis, which is a condition that we might have heard of. There's both viral and bacterial meningitis. This is when the meninges become inflamed and infected with one of these agents. Viral meningitis is somewhat common. There is a vaccine for it. Especially in like areas where people are dorming or living together in kind of close quarters. Bacterial meningitis, we find that this one can be deadly if not treated properly. Right, so the first layer that we can look at with these meningeal layers is something called the dura mater. And these terminologies are all going to look similar, so the key thing is making sure that you know how they're different from each other. Okay, all the meningeal layers will all share the same last names of mater. The first name is what's going to differentiate them. So the dura mater, think of durable, and this literally means tough mother in Latin. This is the outermost layer, which should line up with the toughest layer being on the outside, because it's there for protection. We find that this dura mater is often the place that's going to be used for those anesthetic injections. So sometimes the term an epidural injection, this is what they're referring to. So epi just meaning above or around, and then dura meaning the dura mater. So epidural is referring to that area. So within this epidural space, this is the portion that the spinal, or rather the vertebral canal, is going to come into contact with that dura mater. So the idea is that if you put, for instance, an anesthetic in that area, all the nervous tissue that's in the area becomes anesthetized. Right, so to look at, back to our image here, so the dura mater is really just this outside layer. Okay, it's that tough layer, and it's the thing that's going to provide that protection to the layers that are going to be found deeper. Okay, the next layer that we'll see here is going to be called the arachnoid mater. Arachnoid means spider-like or spider web-like. So this one, if we see down here in some of our descriptions, we're going to end up seeing that the arachnoid mater is going to be pretty much embedded with a lot of the tissues, such as the cerebral spinal fluid. Okay, and this is where we're going to actually have all the kind of nutrition as well as waste removal coming from. So it is that middle layer. Okay, we can see it. If we pull back that dura mater, the arachnoid mater is going to be that next layer that kind of just wraps everything And that's just that interaction point where we have the CSF being created. So you might think of this as kind of like a gooey spider web, just wrapping around the nervous system. All right, the next one we see here is going to be the pia mater. Pia mater means soft mother. So this is the innermost layer. It's going to be the portion of the meninges that's directly bound to the neural tissue. And it's primarily there to add some protection, but also we see that it gives some stabilization to the neurons. Because again, the neurons are just focused on holding, or rather transducing the signals to their targets. So they don't really have anything else in terms of connective tissue. And this pia mater is the thing that can go right on it and then attach it to the rest of the other parts of the connective tissue. All right, last thing we see down here with the blood vessels. Okay, we do see these found within that, along the pia mater, okay, just underneath that subarachnoid space. And so if we look at here, if we were to stick a needle straight down through the spinal cord for some reason, first we'd have to get through that dura mater. Okay, then in between that dura mater and the arachnoid mater, okay, then that's where we're going to see kind of our first little gap in between them. This is what's going to be called the subdural space. Then we come here and we find the arachnoid mater. Okay, and then the arachnoid mater between here and the pia mater, there's also going to be another little space. That's what we call the subarachnoid mater, simply meaning below. That's also where we start seeing that CSF, and we also see that blood vessels. Then we come a little bit deeper to that, and we get the pia mater, and then directly beneath the pia mater is going to be your actual nervous tissue, your neurons in the spinal cord. All right, so next thing we'll take a look at is going to be more in depth with the spinal cord, and we're going to expand upon this to look at these white and gray matter pieces to see what's inside of them. Just a real quick recap from what we had talked about in previous discussions. The gray matter contains the aspects of the nervous system that are going to be darker. Specifically, we see the cell bodies, and we know that the cell bodies contained this feature that ended up making them dark-colored. And what was the name of those features actually found inside the cell bodies that give them the gray appearance? All right, so the term we're looking for is Nissl bodies. So Nissl bodies will be found there. And then everything that's going to be white is going to be surrounded by basically a fatty or lipid-like substance. And that fatty or lipid-like substance is going to be called what? Okay, myelin was the correct term for that. And then we saw that there was these other cells that actually were involved with the creation of the myelin. And in the central nervous system, what were those cells that created myelin? What were those called? Okay, the oligodendrocytes. And then in the peripheral nervous system, we also have this white myelin covering on our nerves. And what was the name of the cells that created that myelin in the peripheral nervous system? All right, so this is going to be that ice cream man, the Schwann cells. All right, so now we take a look at this. Opening these up, looking at the gray and white matter. First off with that white matter, okay, inside of here, or rather the white matter, I should say it. That's going to contain our myelinated, okay, and some unmyelinated axons. This is a more superficial area. Then we go deep to it, that's where we end up having the gray matter, and the gray matter is going to be the neuron cells. And the actual cell bodies are going to be found in there. Okay, we also see unmyelinated axons present inside of the gray matter. Right, now the gray matter if we come right to the center, then we end up seeing that central canal, and that's where we'll end up having the presence of the CSF that's going to be found in that central canal. And then thinking back to last time when we looked at the cellular anatomy, what were the name of the cells that surrounded that central canal? Okay, so the name of the cells surrounding the central canal, those epidymal cells. Alright, so next things we'll take a look at are going to be these particular portions of the gray matter and what's going to be found in those sections of the gray matter. Okay. And we see that there's this division between them. Alright, so what we see here, this should be consistent to what we had looked at last time. We end up seeing the horns. So there's going to be the posterior or dorsal horn, and we also have the ventral or anterior horn up here. And just as we saw last time, this anterior nerve root was associated with the motor. So therefore, the anterior gray horn is going to contain those motor nuclei. And remember, nuclei is just the name for a collection of cell bodies in the central nervous system. Okay, a collection of neuron cell bodies inside the central nervous system. Looking back here, we see the posterior gray horn, and if we remember from last time, the posterior is going to be your sensory. So what we see here is this is that connection point between those peripheral receptors, and we also have those sensory nuclei. Okay, the other portion that we also have sensory cell bodies, is in that dorsal root ganglion. Okay, so that means that there's a connection point, so that the signals basically run down here through the spinal nerve. They'll end up back here in those dorsal root ganglion. There's a connection that's made here, and then if the signal is strong enough, it's going to pass along here, okay, through that nerve root, the dorsal nerve root, and then here you end up having another connection between those axons that were running away from the dorsal nerve root, and then connecting back to the cells found here, the sensory nuclei that are found in the dorsal horn. Alright, so then these gray horns, as we mentioned it, so the posterior gray horn, that contains your sensory nuclei. The anterior gray horn, that's going to contain your motor nuclei. The lateral gray horn, this is only a feature that we see in the areas of the thoracic and lumbar segments, which are going to contain motor nuclei for the visceral organs. Which, if we think about that, the thoracic and lumbar segments, this is primarily where we end up having our visceral organs. So we end up having, for instance, heart, lungs, digestive tract. All those are going to be found inferior to the cervical spine. So because of that, we need some way to control them. For instance, like controlling like a glandular secretion or something like that. So that's what the job of the lateral gray horn will be. Right, after you end up having this, these messages coming in or coming down, they're all going to have to go up to the brain. So then, after the signal has been figured out inside the cell body, we end up dumping it into the axons that will shoot up through the tracts found in the white matter. If there's a signal coming down from the brain, it's going to come down through the white matter, end up connecting back into the horn, and then going out through the spinal nerve. Alright, and then here's just another overview of what the white matter and the gray matter look like. You see the white matter is going to have these ascending and descending tracts. And this isn't a picture in your notes, it's just to illustrate this a little bit better. And then the gray horns here, okay, are these gray matter, that just contains those cell bodies. Alright, so finish up the conversation on the gray and white matter with the next video, and then go into our nerve plexuses.